August, 1976. Memphis, under the bright lights of the Mid-South Coliseum. Elvis halted mid-song, his eyes locked on a woman in a white nurse's uniform, still clutching a hospital ID badge. She'd just finished a double shift, and didn't even know he'd seen her. If you believe small acts of kindness can change someone's life, stay with me. This story isn't just about Elvis the performer. It's about Elvis the man and the night an exhausted nurse became the star. The spotlight caught a shimmer of sequins, but Elvis wasn't looking at the stage, he was looking into the crowd. The Mid-South Coliseum pulsed with noise, 12,000 fans on their feet, the air thick with August humidity and the faint smell of popcorn. Camera flashes popped like tiny bursts of lightning. From the very first chord, the energy was electric. You could hear the hiss of the amplifiers between songs, the thump of bass through the floor. In the third row just left of center stage, a woman eased into her seat. She was in her late 30s, hair still pinned tight from her hospital shift. A crisp white nurse's uniform, not a concert outfit, clung slightly to her after hours on her feet. The ID badge on her collar read County General Hospital. The ticket in her hand was wrinkled, its edges soft from being folded into a pocket. Her co-worker had insisted she take it. Go. You need a break. But she had barely made it in time, slipping into the venue as the house lights dimmed. From his vantage point, Elvis could see her instantly, not clapping, not screaming, just sitting back in her seat, shoulders low, the look of someone running on fumes. He scanned past the waving hands and the fan signs, but his gaze returned to her. Witnesses later said it was like the rest of the crowd vanished. She noticed it too, a flicker of recognition, but she quickly looked away, not daring to think. The king of rock and roll was looking at her. The band kicked into Can't Help Falling in Love. The familiar opening chords rolled out, but Elvis didn't sing. Instead, he stepped back from the microphone. A hush spread through the first few rows. His head turned slightly, eyes still locked in her direction. Then he started to walk, slow, deliberate steps toward the edge of the stage, scanning the seats as though searching for one person. The nurse sat very still, unsure if she should look up. Around her, fans craned their necks, wondering what had pulled Elvis's attention away from the music. The spotlight followed him down stage. He raised his right hand. The band quieted, the guitar strum fading to silence. You could hear the faint whir of the stage fans, the rustle of paper programs in the crowd. Elvis's gaze stopped exactly where she sat. A ripple of whispers spread through the section. "Is he looking at you?" someone behind her asked. Her pulse quickened. She swallowed hard. He took a small step closer, peering into the seats with that unmistakable half-smile. And then, right in the middle of the song, Elvis Presley stepped away from the microphone and walked straight toward her. The band froze mid-chord. The king raised his hand, and the room went still. A single sustained guitar note hung in the air before fading into nothing. Elvis stood near the edge of the stage, right boot forward, hand lifted toward the TCB band in a signal they knew well: stop. The sudden quiet hit the arena like a wave. You could hear the low hum of the lights overhead, the muffled shouts from fans still realizing something unusual was happening. Somewhere in the balcony, someone coughed. Elvis leaned slightly, scanning the third row again. His gaze found the nurse, and this time, there was no mistaking it. Her face flushed instantly. She glanced over her shoulder, almost laughing under her breath, as if the idea of Elvis Presley looking directly at her couldn't possibly be real. But then he lifted his arm and pointed, right at her. A visible ripple ran through the crowd, the way a single pebble sends circles through still water. People began turning to see who had caught the king's attention. Witnesses would later recall that even the security guards shifted uneasily, not sure if they were about to stop a stage rusher or escort someone in. Elvis turned to his right and motioned for a man in a black sport coat, one of his floor security team. He leaned down, said a few quick words, and the guard nodded. The nurse's breath caught. The guard stepped off the stage and moved with quiet authority toward the aisle. Fans watched him pass, their eyes darting between the nurse and Elvis. She sat rigid, hands pressed flat on her knees. "I think he means you," the woman next to her whispered, voice trembling with a mix of excitement and disbelief. The nurse shook her head lightly, almost willing the moment to pass. But the guard kept coming, stopping at her. He leaned down, spoke just loud enough for her to hear over the low murmur. "Ma'am, he'd like you to come with me." Her eyes went wide. She looked once more toward the stage. Elvis was still there, patient, smiling, one corner of his mouth lifted like he knew exactly how shocked she was. The people in the rows around her started clapping softly, urging her to go. One person touched her shoulder in encouragement. Slowly she rose to her feet. Her knees felt unsteady, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The guard gestured toward the aisle. "It's all right," he said, "he's waiting." The nurse began walking, the crowd parting just enough for her to pass. She could feel every eye on her, the heat of the spotlights brushing her as she moved closer to the stage. When she reached the front, Elvis took a single step forward, bent one knee, and held out his hand. For a moment, she didn't move, frozen by the sight of Elvis Presley kneeling before her. The glare from the stage lights washed over her, turning the rest of the arena into a soft blur. She could see the glint of rhinestones on Elvis's white jumpsuit, the fringe of his scarf swaying slightly in the breeze from the stage fans. Her hospital ID badge dangled against her chest, catching the light with each small movement. Elvis's eyes flicked to it and back to her face. Into the microphone he said, gently, but clearly, "Long night, honey." The words, simple as they were, cracked something open inside her. She nodded once, unable to find her voice. The crowd erupted, not with the wild, frenzied screams of earlier, but with a softer, rolling cheer. The kind that says, "We see this too." Elvis extended his hand a little farther. She hesitated only a second before placing hers in his. His grip was warm, firm, but not hurried. With a smooth pull, he guided her up onto the stage. The sudden brightness was blinding. She could feel the heat from the overhead spots, smell the faint tang of hairspray and aftershave drifting from the band. Cameras flashed from every angle, the pops freezing moments in midair. Elvis stepped aside to give her space, one arm still lightly around her back for reassurance. He reached up to his neck and slid off a white silk scarf, the kind he often gave to fans, but this time he didn't toss it. He draped it over her shoulders himself. "She's been working all night, folks," he told the crowd, his voice carrying a note of admiration. "Let's give her a little love." The cheers swelled, thousands of voices blending into one wave of sound. She pressed the scarf to her chest, the fabric cool at first, then warming quickly in her hands. Without missing a beat, the band eased back into the song. Elvis turned toward her, and instead of playing to the cameras or the front row, he sang the next verse directly to her. Eyes steady, voice smooth but filled with a quiet intensity. She felt herself smiling without meaning to. The moment wrapped around her like the scarf itself, shutting out everything except his voice. And then, something shifted. Elvis's gaze broke from hers just long enough to signal the band with a small, almost imperceptible motion. The instruments faded again, leaving only the hush of the crowd and the faint ring in the speakers. The band members exchanged quick glances. They hadn't expected this. The audience seemed to sense something was about to happen. Elvis took the guitar from one of his bandmates, adjusted the strap, and looked at her with a grin. "Let's do this right," he said. And the stage fell silent. Elvis adjusted the guitar strap, glanced at the band, and spoke into the mic. "This one's just for." A murmur rippled through the arena, the kind that happens when thousands of people lean in at the same time. The spotlights shifted, tightening on Elvis and the nurse. Everything else fell into shadow. He strummed a soft, deliberate chord. The warm tone rang out, lingering in the thick summer air before dissolving into silence. His voice dropped low, almost conversational. "Long nights deserve a little tenderness." The opening notes of "Love Me Tender" floated across the room. No drums, no bass, just Elvis's voice and the gentle rise and fall of the guitar. From her place beside him, The nurse could feel the vibration through the stage floor. Her fingers curled around the scarf, holding it like an anchor. She glanced out toward the crowd, but the light was too bright to make out faces. Just a sea of silhouettes, still and waiting. He leaned slightly toward her during the verses. His eyes locked on hers in a way that made it feel as though they were alone. Each word seemed slower, more intentional. You could hear the faint scrape of his pick against the strings. The sound of him drawing breath before each line. In the upper decks, people began swaying together, some holding hands. A few wiped away cameras flashed sporadically, but even the photographers seemed to respect the quiet of the moment. Halfway through, Elvis turned just enough to angle the mic toward her. "Sing with me," he whispered, audible only to her. She shook her head, smiling nervously. "I can't." He gave a reassuring grin and sang the next line softer, inviting her in without pressure. By the final chorus she was singing, barely above a whisper, but enough for him to hear. When the song ended, the crowd didn't explode right away. Instead, there was a beat of silence, like no one wanted to break the spell. Then the applause came, a rising wave that filled every inch of the Colosseum. But Elvis wasn't finished. He held up his hand, palm out. The cheering quieted. He stepped closer, leaning down so only she could hear. His words were lost to everyone else in the room. Whatever he said made her eyes glisten, her lips part in surprise. She nodded once, clutching the scarf tighter. From the crowd, all they saw was the king whispering something to a woman on stage. But for her, it was a moment she knew she'd carry for the rest of her life. Elvis handed his guitar back to a bandmate, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and walked her toward the edge of the stage, as if setting up something even bigger. She stepped back into the crowd, but the night wasn't done with her yet. The nurse descended the small set of stairs at the side of the stage, helped down by the same security guard who'd brought her up. Her feet felt heavy against the floor, like she was walking through water. The scarf hung loosely around her neck, the scent of Elvis's cologne, warm, musky, still clinging to it. As she made her way back to her seat, the audience clapped for her. Strangers leaned in with wide smiles, telling her how lucky she was. She gave small nods, barely able to form words. Up on stage, Elvis launched back into the high-energy set. Burning Love, Suspicious Minds, and a medley that had the crowd back on their feet. Lights flashed in bursts of red and gold. The bass thumped like a heartbeat, and the show rolled on as if nothing unusual had happened. But for her, nothing felt the same. She stayed through the final bow, watching as scarves flew into the crowd, and the band played their last note. The roar of applause chased Elvis as he disappeared backstage. The house lights rose, revealing rows of flushed, grinning faces. People began gathering their things. Programs folded into purses. Cameras stowed away. She slipped her arms into her jacket, still holding onto the scarf with one hand. She was almost to the aisle when a man in a dark jacket stepped into her path. His presence was calm but purposeful, the kind of quiet authority that made you stop without question. "Ma'am?" His voice was polite but firm. "From Mr. Presley." In his hands, he carried a small black velvet case. She blinked, uncertain if she'd heard him right. "For me?" she asked. He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She opened the case slowly. Inside, nestled against soft satin, was a gold necklace with a tiny TCB lightning bolt charm. Elvis's taking care of business symbol. It shimmered in the overhead lights, delicate yet unmistakable. Her breath caught. Beneath it, folded once, was a small piece of paper. She lifted it carefully and read the handwriting. Large, looping, familiar from autographs she'd seen in magazines. "For someone who gives more than she takes. Thank you. EP." The words blurred as her eyes filled. She closed the case gently, afraid she might drop it. Around her the crowd thinned, the echoes of the night fading into the hum of the cleanup crew. The man in the jacket gave a respectful nod before disappearing into the sea of people. She stood there for a moment longer, fingers resting on the velvet, heart still pounding. She thought that was the end of it. Until, a week later, something arrived at the hospital that left her speechless all over again. 7 days later, the story wasn't over. It was about to take a turn no one at County General saw coming. It was a gray Monday morning at the hospital. The nurse had been on the floor since before sunrise, moving between patient rooms. adjusting IV drips, and answering call button. The weekend's memories still lingered in flashes. The blinding lights, the scarf, the sound of Elvis's voice filling the air around her. But in the bustle of work, it felt like something she'd dreamed. At the nurse's station, a receptionist sorted through the morning deliveries. A stack of charts, a box of medical supplies, and one oversized padded envelope. The front bore her name in neat handwriting. No return address, just the city. Memphis, Tennessee. "Looks like you've got mail," the receptionist said with a grin, sliding it across the counter. She wiped her hands on her uniform and opened it carefully. Inside was a leather folder, the kind you'd use to hold official documents. When she flipped it open, 2 thick, glossy cards slid into her hand. Her heart skipped. They weren't just tickets. They were lifetime passes, laminated embossed with Elvis Presley's gold signature, and marked front row. Any show, any city. Behind them was a folded note on cream stationery. She recognized the handwriting instantly. "You'll always have a seat. Keep taking care of people. I'll keep singing for you. EP." Her knees went weak. She leaned against the counter for balance as the words sank in. "Is that—" one of her coworkers began, eyes widening. "Yes," she whispered. Within minutes, the small cluster of nurses had grown. Word spread down the hallway. Even the head surgeon stepped out of an operating room to take a look. Someone dabbed at their eyes. Someone else laughed in disbelief. She stood in the middle of it all, passes in one hand, the note in the other, and then she felt it again, that same sense she'd felt on stage. For one night she hadn't just been a face in the crowd, she had been seen. One of the younger nurses touched the scarf draped over her locker door. "You keeping that safe?" she asked. "In a shadow box," she said with a smile. "Right next to the necklace." In the days that followed, patients asked her about the concert. Visitors would peek into her room just to say they'd heard the story. For years afterward, she'd bring out the scarf, the necklace, and the passes on special occasions, letting people hold them and hear the tale from start to finish. Some say she even used those passes, quietly, without fanfare, showing up in the front row at shows in Nashville, Las Vegas, and back home in Memphis. But whether she went to every one or only a few didn't matter. What mattered was the message. The woman who spent her life working double shifts, tending to strangers through long nights and emergencies, had for one unforgettable night been cared for herself by the king of rock and roll. Years later, after Elvis had passed, those items became more than keepsakes. They were proof, not just of a moment with a music legend, but of the power of kindness to reach across a crowd, stop the music, and change the course of an ordinary night. Sometimes the smallest gestures, made at exactly the right moment, can echo for a lifetime. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room, and tell me what's the most unexpected kindness you've ever witnessed.